In 2012, Telltale Games emerged as pioneers of interactive storytelling in gaming, reshaping the entire industry with their episodic, choice-driven titles. Their breakthrough adaptation of The Walking Dead not only received several Game of the Year nominations, but also established a new market for choice-driven games of this style. Telltale found a way to immerse players into worlds where their decisions shaped the unfolding story, and they were untouchable. But 6 years later, the entire studio would unexpectedly close down, and over 250 people would lose their jobs in a matter of days. So how did a company that had such a meteoric rise to superstardom quickly find themselves in one of the ugliest and most shocking studio closures in the history of the video game industry? Well, to tell this story, we need to start with their quick rise to fame, because ironically, this is what would lead to their downfall. The three founders of Telltale, Kevin Bruner, Dan Connors, and Troy Molander, all saw some success with the adventure game genre prior to founding the studio. Each of them had come from LucasArts, which during the 90s was basically the leading developer in the genre. But because of a round of unexpected mass layoffs, the trio decided to take a chance on themselves and start their own adventure game studio called Telltale Games in 2004. In the early years of Telltale, they had found a little bit of success in the genre with releases like Tales of Monkey Island and Back to the Future. However, these games never really reached critical acclaim because, well, they were nothing special. The gameplay was relatively stale, the writing was uninteresting, and the same tired tropes were overused to tell the same story in different ways. They really just had trouble sticking the landing with any of their releases, and some of their other early titles like Jurassic Park and CSI seemed to echo the same complaints. Mainly that these stories were too basic, too short, and not nearly innovative enough. Because of this, Jurassic Park and many of Telltale's initial titles didn't perform well and would put quite a bit of financial strain on the company. They reached a point where they needed to get something out pretty quickly, so they started scrambling. And ironically, this scramble would lead to the development of the game that would put them on the map and later cause the downfall of the entire company. 2012 marked the release of the first season of Telltale's The Walking Dead, based on and actually made in collaboration with Robert Kirkman and his famous comic and TV show of the same name. This game wasn't just another Telltale game, it was absolutely groundbreaking for the studio and the gaming industry at large. They managed to strike gold with The Walking Dead's release and sold millions of copies relatively quickly. A lot of the success stems from the fact that they created an emotionally gripping story that capitalized on the source material it was using. The Walking Dead didn't just tell a story, it created a world that seeped into your bones. The desperation of the survivors, the bleakness of the ravaged landscape, it all felt crushingly real. And the reason why this game did so well was because of the aspect of choice. The way Telltale designed this game, players could truly choose everything along their journey to directly influence the story. The idea of interactive choices that have real consequences on the characters and the story wasn't new to Telltale, but the level at which this was pulled off was significantly higher in The Walking Dead. The ability to utilize the grim, depressing world from the comics and TV shows gave them the direction to make choices that actually matter. And well, this clearly seemed to resonate with the audience because the game received over 80 Game of the Year awards and sold over 28 million copies. 12 years later, and The Walking Dead is still touted as one of the best adventure games ever made, and is often used as an example when discussing emotional depth and character writing in video game stories. The Walking Dead was a huge risk for Telltale, but it paid off more than they could have ever imagined. It had allowed the studio to rapidly expand, and it also provided them with a definitive Telltale style that they knew could work. And they would successfully utilize this style a second time in 2013 with The Wolf Among Us, which was arguably even better than The Walking Dead. Building upon the brutal choices and emotional depth of its predecessor, The Wolf Among Us constructed a beautiful mystery story, once again utilizing the emotion and depth found in The Walking Dead. The choices were extremely impactful, the characters were well-rounded, and the plot was full of moments that genuinely made a lot of people cry. It was a masterpiece. Then, they repeated the formula again with The Walking Dead Season 2, and it had kind of the same effect. Impactful choices, plot twists, shock, and emotions. Then, they made Tales from the Borderlands, Game of Thrones, Minecraft Story Mode, Batman, and 2 additional Walking Dead spin-offs, all within the span of 3 years. The same formula, the same choices, the same shock value and plot twist. The same everything. Sure, sometimes it was executed well, and other times it fell short, but they basically repeated the same formula over and over again and hoped for something something new. The shock and emotion started to feel like a tired trope, and the plots converged together into a predictable, repeatable, and scalable formula instead of something truly creative and unique. A studio that was once touted for its risk-taking and unique storytelling began to do the exact opposite. Characters started to feel either like carbon copies of characters from previous games or just completely generic and uninspired. With the exception of a few minor plot changes, each story felt like a copy and paste from previous titles. Even the choices were affected by this formulaic approach, with each choice feeling less and less impactful to the story at large. The hype and positive sentiment of the fanbase began rapidly dropping with each release, as Telltale went from a studio that seemed to do nothing wrong to a studio that seemed to do nothing right. As the failed releases began to pile up, Telltale's financial problems returned. With these issues came pressure to release quicker and quicker. The need to speed up was a counterproductive one and only led to a further drop in the quality of the games and a crunch culture problem that would cause a snowball effect and send Telltale Games into a downward spiral. They probably needed a nap after this because things were about to get even crazier. And for their sake, I hope they use the sponsor of today's video, Manta Sleep. I know one thing, as I've gotten older, I've learned to appreciate my sleep, and nothing makes me appreciate it more than the Sleep Mask Pro by Manta Sleep. I never realized how much even just a little bit of light affects my sleep until I owned this thing. Now that I wear it when I take a nap or go to bed at night, I fall asleep twice as fast because it blocks out literally all the light. Here's a dramatic recreation of what that looks like. And it's extremely comfortable. Because of these cups, you don't even feel the pressure on your eyes, and you forget that you even have it on. The Sleep Mask Pro is the most advanced sleep mask on the planet, and all of Manta Sleep's products are extremely high quality, with a silk one for the bougie people out there, one that plays sound, a weighted one, and others. If you want to level up your sleep, their products are absolutely worth checking out. They're extremely affordable and literally changed my life because of how much more rested I feel in the morning. So check out Manta Sleep by using my link in the description and use my discount code for 10% off your cart at checkout. Now, let's return to the story about Telltale. I mentioned a downward spiral, and to understand how this happened in the first place, we need to look a bit deeper into what was actually going on internally at Telltale during this time, and specifically discuss one of the founders of the company, Kevin Bruner. Shortly after the release of The Wolf Among Us, the studio lost two of their most talented developers and writers, Sean Vanaman and Jake Rodkin, the masterminds behind many early Telltale titles like Sam & Max and the Monkey Island series. They had also played a pivotal role in the success of Season 1 of The Walking Dead. They had decided to leave to open their own studio called Campo Santo, known for their story-based title called Firewatch. The loss of this duo was almost certainly a contributing factor in the decrease in innovation and uniqueness in the releases following their departure, which was seen as soon as the second season of The Walking Dead released. Despite a generally positive reception, most would say that this game certainly wasn't an improvement on the original season. But this is beside the point. The real question is this: why would Vanaman and Rodkin leave the studio in the first place? Well, a major contributing factor to why they left was their issues with co-founder Kevin Bruner. Bruner was in a management position, while the duo worked primarily on creative projects. And allegedly, Bruner had been jealous of the praise that Vanaman and Rodkin had received for their writing and storytelling. This jealousy became a problem, and it started to cause a massive bottleneck where Bruner was micromanaging every detail of the creative process, nitpicking everything to do with storylines, character development, and overall game design. Despite having gotten their way with The Walking Dead Season 1, the pair couldn't be asked to continue fighting with Bruner over every single decision, and they decided to leave. These two wouldn't be the only ones that would leave either. The directors, animators, and writers also would head for the door to find greener pastures, some joining Vanaman and Rodkin at Campo Santo, and some creating their own indie projects. And despite these losses, the studio did not slow down. Instead, they pushed it into another gear. At the time, over 300 employees worked on multiple titles simultaneously, including Game of Thrones, Tales from the Borderlands, and Minecraft Story Mode. Each of these games were all rushed out in a time frame that was simply not sustainable, and what this ended up doing was creating a crunch culture where many of the employees were working 14 to 18-hour days trying to stick to the insane schedule that was being forced on them. So the employees didn't perform very well, and the games themselves were not up to the quality of the early Telltale successes. And not to mention, making so many games based on purchased IPs made it to where Telltale had to report to other companies, and devs would often be asked to redo huge portions of the game at the last minute. Telltale began to prioritize output over employee well-being, and morale, as well as the games themselves, began to suffer because of it. Extreme growth was the goal, and this increase in output would lead to the biggest project Telltale had ever been involved in, Batman. This game was expensive, not only because of the development cost, but also because of how expensive it is to license legacy established IP like this. They hoped that a Batman game would once again provide the spark that the original Walking Dead Season 1 had found, that it would reignite the passion that fans once had. But ironically, the first season of Batman would not only cause fans to lose interest in Telltale, but to turn against them entirely. When this game launched, everyone was underwhelmed. People were tired of experiencing the same thing every single time. The games had just become predictable, boring, and pointless, and the Telltale tool engine that they'd been using for a decade was starting to show its age. The engine was clunky, restrictive, and just overall lacking in many aspects. It was good when it was first unveiled, but a decade later, its lack of a dedicated physics system and other drastic shortcomings would prevent Telltale Games from innovating and doing new things. It was simplistic enough to allow for releasing a large quantity of games, but didn't allow much room for creative expression, if the devs had any time for that in the first place. It became obvious to fans, critics, and even employees of the studio that the engine needed an upgrade. Well, except Kevin Bruner. Instead of accepting the limitations of his creation and listening to the fanbase, Bruner remained stubborn, claiming that the similarities between games were intentional and that they wanted the games to have a baseline feel that would be enhanced by the writing. And the fanbase did not accept this explanation. And after the less than exciting launches of Game of Thrones and Tales from the Borderlands, followed by the underwhelming release of the Batman game, the company began to face some financial troubles, and this would mark the beginning of the end for Telltale Games. Kevin Bruner stepped down as CEO in 2017, and Telltale hired former Zynga CEO Pete Hawley to attempt to fix the sinking ship. Pete's first order of business was simple: downsizing. He would let go of nearly 25% of the company in an attempt to return to its small-scale roots, stating that he wanted to produce fewer games with a smaller team, just like the good old days. There were a few games in the pipeline, and inevitably, none of these would hit quite like the early Telltale successes. So, in an attempt to reacquire their old fanbase, the final season of The Walking Dead would be announced alongside a follow-up to the beloved Wolf Among Us game. From the outside, it seemed as though this new plan may turn things around. All they needed to do was deliver a few high-quality continuations of their most beloved titles, and they would be good to go without the massive burden of a bloated studio. It was by all accounts sink or swim for Telltale. Everything was on the line, and if these games didn't succeed, they would be in a really rough spot. But unfortunately, the first episode of The Walking Dead's final season was also met with a lukewarm response. For the most part, those who played it enjoyed it, but for the studio, their main financial issue at hand was not being solved. The problem came with the sales numbers. Not enough people were buying the game to begin with. They swung for the fences, and unfortunately, they missed. And exactly 1 month later would mark the final nail in the coffin for Telltale, as on September 18th, 2018, they would let go of nearly 250 employees and cancel all of the previously announced projects. Episode 2 of The Walking Dead's final season would still be released the following week, but the status of the remaining 2 episodes was completely unknown. In a final shred of good news, they would eventually announce that they'd kept a skeleton crew of about 25 people who would finish up the projects that they currently had going. Shortly after this, they would release the second season of Minecraft Story Mode and the final edition of The Walking Dead. But this was the end, and the once beloved studio began its fade from the spotlight. The devastating mass layoffs on September 21st, 2018 had already shattered the studio. Legal battles followed, and on October 2018, Telltale filed for assignment. While a fragment of Telltale lives on under new ownership, the studio, as it was known, is forever gone, leaving a bittersweet legacy in the gaming world. The impact of their model, particularly seen in the first season of The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us, continues to influence game development today. Impactful choices and branching narratives have now become a staple in modern gaming, showing the enduring legacy of their work. Even though the studio's closure was an unfortunate event, there may still be a glimmer of hope for longtime Telltale fans. In August of 2019, a company called LCG Entertainment acquired many of their assets, including some beloved IP. They resurrected the Telltale Games name game, though operating as a fundamentally different entity with new leadership and a focus on collaborative partnerships. They even once again announced a second season of The Wolf Among Us, and while it has been delayed several times throughout the process, it's expected to be released sometime in 2024. Are you willing to give Telltale another chance? Do you think they'll learn from their mistakes and return to what made them successful in the first place, or do you think that their story is a tale of disappointment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, I will see you next time, and peace.